Buildings behind me were the headquarters for the World War II Office of Strategic Service. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began.
So 10 years before Stanley Kubrick made The Shining, he made another film. It was a film about mind control called A Clockwork Orange.
The Shining is one movie that has really been put through the ringer, and one thing that people really don't notice, that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
All during the shoot, Kubrick is rewriting the movie.
What we see here is Stanley Kubrick trying to encode a secret meaning into The Shining that he doesn't want anyone to know about.
Kubrick has several references to Freemasonry in his films.
There's a lady that walks past that has a bloody handprint on her ass.
The Shining is Kubrick's 11th film, and there's 11s all through the film. 11 is a special number in occult theology.
The Shining has been regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made, but is it really a horror film?
The Shining also is loaded with sexual innuendo.
The family is isolated up at the Overlook, which is a perfect opportunity for some sort of CIA experimentation to go down up there.
Using MK Ultra methods, psychiatrically control assassins. Literally assassins.
Experimental drugs, including LSD, were administered to human guinea pigs. The patients were never told that their treatment was part of a CIA experiment.
And there is this story which involves him spiking the drinks of one of his deputies, this guy Frank Olson, and he jumped out of a window to his death.
It's a demonic possession, you know, so it makes someone feel like they don't have any control over this etherical entity outside themselves, when really it's the people who are imposing the trauma that need to be held accountable for the actions.
Mrs. Thomas.
We know what happened in the apartment that they had.
There are many clues that point to the fact that this theory of what The Shining is really about is the correct theory.
We think that we're watching a horror movie where ghosts are kind of forcing a man to go off and kill his family, but what are we really watching here?
Welcome to the Hotel California.
Wendy, I'm home.
Welcome back to another wonderful Raised by Giants discussion. We are live. Welcome everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys and any moderators and or channel members out there. Today we have a very exciting show for you guys involving the strangest disappearance of a man that I have ever heard. But a quick reminder that my brand new documentary, A Clockwork Shining, will be released at the end of the month on Amazon Prime. Fingers crossed. I really hope everyone watches it when it gets released. Supporting independent filmmakers is very important, and that's where the industry is really headed. I'll keep everyone updated exactly when it drops. If it's not at the end of this month, it'll be the beginning of October, and I'm really excited about it. It's the best thing that I've ever put together and have ever been a part of. I'm really excited for you guys to see it. So without further ado, we have with us this evening returning guest, author and director of the Anomalous Studies and Observation Group, which focuses on investigating places of extreme high strangeness. He's former DoD, U.S. Army Military Intelligence, security specialist, anti-terrorism, and counterintelligence, Trey Hudson. Welcome back to the show. How's it going, my friend?
Hey, it's going great. I'm just Ryder. I'm happy to be here as always. You know, you put a jingle on the phone and say, "Can you come on?" And I'm I put my running shoes on. So I'm just tickled pink to be here once again.
Thanks so much, Trey. We're going to get weird here today, my friend. Weird times, weird things are happening. So I'm looking forward to it.
The weirder, the better. And, just so you know just how weird it could get is I have the sacred yellow pad of inquiry out with writing on it. So, I've been, really kind of digging down into this. So I'm really geeked out about it. It's going to be a great show.
I am too. And next up, we have returning guest that also investigates area of high strangeness and actually owns property overlooking Skinwalker Ranch. He hosts the popular Hero Paranormal podcast and has written about his experiences investigating the Skinwalker. Ryan Burns, welcome back to the show, my friend. How's it going?
Going great, Ryder. Any day with yourself and Trey is weird, and I'm all about getting weird. I can't wait to get into it.
Getting weird, baby. I just realized that you guys actually know each other and have worked together before. I didn't really know about that. Tell us how you guys both met.
Oh, go ahead, Ryder. That's
okay. So we were involved with the project. I think it's okay to talk about now.
Yeah, I think
so. It was something taking place in New Mexico, having to do with various extraterrestrial or UAP related experiences. And we told you a little bit about it at the beginning, but yeah, we ended up kind of going to this remade Chinese restaurant that was being used as a kind of base camp for operations. And, just a weird scenario. Didn't know who was going to show up. And sure enough, there, I walked in and there's Trey in this Chinese restaurant. And I'm like, well, things are going to get weird, a lot like today. And they did.
Yeah, it was kind of odd because this Chinese restaurant, you walk in and it's like, half of this building and it's kind of like run down and it's got like, greasy paper on the windows. And you're like, is this like, am I going to get murdered? And then you walk in, it's like a CIA safe house, all this equipment's everywhere and people milling about doing their sundry things. And then you kind of get to take a peek back behind the curtain and see how the sausage is actually made, on these projects. And it was just really quick, really, really cool. And I'd been a guest on Ryder's show, Hero Paranormal, before. So that's kind of how I think we first became acquainted. But our paths are starting to kind of cross and intertwine now a little bit more as the high strangeness community, and I hope this is true. I hope this isn't just a wild wish on my part. I think maybe people are starting to communicate and interact a little bit better, and we can start sharing experiences. And I spent this weekend actually with a friend of Ryan's up in the mountains somewhere with Jacob and my mind just went completely blank. The Confessionals podcast.
Tony.
Yeah.
Tony. I'm sorry, Tony. You're going to
Tony Merkel.
Tony Merkel. Yeah, you're going to kick my butt. So I mean, all our paths are starting to cross now, and I think that's really cool. So as we talked about earlier, the paths are crossing. Independent filmmaking is at its zenith. So it's a good time. Good time.
Was the Chinese restaurant made specifically for your guys' set? Did they remake it?
No, it was an operating
Chinese restaurant.
Yes.
It was like a cover. They just put actors in there and pretended that it was a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, and Ryan can attest to this. Is you'd walk through the kitchen to go to the bathroom, and there are guys, they're making up whatever dish, and they kind of look up at you and then go back to their work, and it was just kind of surreal.
It really was. Literally guys with cleavers cutting stuff up, and you're looking over like it was like Big Trouble in Little China, if you remember that. Yeah. And there was one point, I'm sure Trey remembers this one point. There was one guy who was so kind of astounded by all of the, sundriness of the scenario that he started wondering. He said, I'm worried that there's feds looking about. And I remember Trey was in the back seat of a vehicle at that point and said, I was a fed until just recently. And the look in the guy's eyes was, it was really a fun experience. It really was.
I never told you what I did to that guy later, because the place where we actually filmed, the building, and then had the production van behind it. Well, we were all kind of standing back there waiting for the sun to set for some of the scenes, and so this guy was really agitated. He had an app on his phone, and he was like watching for spurious RF energy, and it's like, dude, everybody's wearing wireless mics. Of course, there's spurious RF energy. But I thought, well, let me just see what I can do here. And I'm like, you know what, dude? I was sitting here and I saw this like big black Suburban pull up like 2 blocks down. And he's like, yeah. And I saw these hobos get out of it. But the hobos seem to have very expensive single lens reflex cameras with long lenses. And they just kind of started wandering around. And one of them was right over here. And I'm making all this up, And this guy's he's starting to get more agitated and more excited, and I don't know.
I don't know if it would be the feds or if it would be the Health and Food Administration looking into the Chinese restaurant.
Or the Mormons, one or the other. I don't know who it was, but I'm just like a stick looking for a pot to stir. And so anyway, it was an interesting few days.
Man, speaking of like Vegas and stuff, I just watched a little documentary on YouTube last night, Ryan, where there's like tunnels all under Vegas of like homeless people, where like homeless people and like drug addicts live, like, and it spans all through Vegas. I didn't even know about it. I knew about the tunnels under LA, but I didn't know that there was ones under Vegas as well.
Yeah, I have a buddy that took a golf cart into them, and he said that they went as far as they could go, and it was miles and miles. But they wanted to make sure to be able to come out because they didn't want to run out of juice in there. But yeah, it's over 2,000 people, the population underneath Vegas right now.
That's wild. Do we know how those were they built whenever they built the city of Vegas, or were they there before? Because the ones in LA supposedly were there before. I'm sure you guys know about the theories of the tunnels underneath LA, where reptilians supposedly live in the tunnels under LA. And you had that gentleman, his last name was Schufelt, and he was going to dig into the tunnels. I posted about it on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. But this guy he had like this sonar type of like X-ray machine, and he mapped out all the tunnels underneath LA, and he said that it like mapped out in like what looked like a reptilian or like a lizard or something like that. And then he saw that there was like giant gold slabs on the X-ray machine, and then he started like digging. They got the permission from LA, like the city of LA, to do it, and he went into the back of a parking lot, started drilling down into the concrete, and then he hit this like mud, and they thought if they dig down any further into the tunnel that it would just completely collapse the tunnel, so they stopped digging, and then it just kind of went quiet. And supposedly the guy's like maps and all that was like stolen, and his X-ray machine was stolen, which you don't know how much of this has just been like lore or whatever. But do we know anything about the tunnels in Vegas? I'm guessing that they were built by the people that built Vegas, right?
Interestingly, yes. And it's kind of a two-part yes. So yes and yes. So the people that built Vegas were pretty much Mormons and the mob. And interestingly, yes, tunnels were built by the mob, but also they have these massive, like 100-year floods. And when that happens, because of the caliche and the hardness of the ground, they realized really quick that they needed to have massive drainage systems after the fact. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was a couple instances where there were just huge floods, and basically this required all kinds of underground excavation. Luckily, a lot of the people in Vegas are very familiar with underground excavation due to projects nearby. So yeah, there's a massive. In fact, some of them are so big you can fit semis into them, and some of the rooms open up so large that this friend of mine said that you literally you could hear an echo. You could tell the room was huge, and it wasn't until you put like a really bright spotlight that you realized just how big it was, like the size of Costco's and Walmart's, and even bigger in some cases.
That's wild. Because they were also talking about in the little YouTube documentary that I watched that it would flood a lot of times, and that all the people's stuff, which I don't really know how much valuable things they actually could possibly have down there, but it all gets destroyed.
Yeah, a really funny story, not to get derailed from what we're talking about, is my wife was working for a construction company I'll leave unnamed at the time, but she got an emergency call one day, and a gentleman that worked just under her, had heavy equipment fall into a tunnel. And this was right on the Vegas Strip. And, it's what was really funny about this is I had just talked to her. I had, this was years ago. I had gotten off the phone with John Lear, the late, great John Lear. And he was telling me the location of one tunnel that would be now under where the Aria is, like City Center. And he was telling me exactly where it was and what tunnels it connected to. And he basically under his breath said, like, people are going to start finding these because of all the construction. And then literally that same week, this guy called with an emergency call. What do we do? We've lost equipment that's fallen into a tunnel. We don't know who built the tunnel. It looks old. It doesn't show up on the maps or the schematics. What do we do? She told him who to call. And they basically said, rebuild it the way you found it, because they didn't have any info on it either. And that's kind of how Vegas is. Salt Lake City, Utah, where I grew up, it has like wild tunnel lore as well. There used to be all kinds of tunnels leading out from Temple Square, the LDS temple, going in all directions. And back then there was a mall across the street called the Crossroads Mall. And they claimed a lot of this reptilian stuff at the Crossroads Mall. And they rebuilt that, renamed it. And I remember when they knocked it down, there were so many levels underground that you could see from the street, but they rebuilt it and they called it the Gateway, which isn't much better from a conspiracy perspective. But yeah, there's all kinds of wild reptilian lore going into the tunnels under Salt Lake City, Utah. And I remember I went to the Peary Hotel, a very old hotel that's miles away from Temple Square. And they took us down into these tunnels that they called the catacombs. And they told us, which way to go if you wanted to head towards Temple Square. So I don't know how far and vast these tunnel systems are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so weird. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Just quickly, I remember I read an article on the troglodytes of Las Vegas, and I remember seeing photographs of almost like apartments, like apartment units they would build out of pallets and stuff, and they had couches, and they would bootleg electricity and all, and it was just like an underground city, like you see in some sort of dystopian movie.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not completely off topic, because I think that might be, speaking of like tunnels and stuff, that might be how some of these people like go missing. Like they get into some of these tunnels. Like it's said in the catacombs in Paris, like you can just get completely lost in there if you don't know where you're going, and you'll never be found. It's so vast and so deep, and it's just strange that how all these like cities are just built on top of like miles and miles of tunnels. Freaking weird. It's almost like some kind of military thing going on. But what we're here for today is to talk about this gentleman named Steven Kubacki. And I'm just going to give an overview of this case, which is probably the most fascinating missing persons case I've ever read about. So then get both of your guys' thoughts, because I sent you both this article of this gentleman that went missing. So Steven Kubacki was a college student. He was going to college to be a doctor. He was actually in his final year of schooling, but in 1978, Steven Kubacki went cross-country skiing on the frozen over Lake Michigan. Like the lake had been frozen over, and went hiking up there. And when he didn't return, his dad then filed a missing persons report. The police investigated the area where he reportedly went missing. They found his snowmobile, his skis, his poles, his skiing poles, and his backpack, which I find really odd. And after an extensive search, the search and rescue teams got involved, and they had determined that the Steven Kubacki must have fallen into one of the deep caverns in the ice and then drowned. Though there wasn't any evidence of this, they just found all of his stuff. His family and his friends went through the mourning process of his death. His college even held a memorial, and they gave him a diploma in his absence. He was a very well-liked individual. He didn't have any mental issues or mental problems that we know of. But the most interesting part about this story is that 15 months later, a man in Massachusetts picked up a hitchhiker who asked to be taken to the nearest payphone. This was Steven Kubacki, right? He told his family, his friends, and the media that he had woken up in a nearby field. He was wearing clothes that he didn't recognize, and that he had no recollection of what had happened to him over the past 15 months beforehand, before he went missing up on Lake Michigan. And this story kind of just faded into obscurity, really, because Mr. Kubacki claimed that he didn't remember any of it and where he had been the past 15 months. So what do we make of this case, gentlemen?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, and I kind of did a deep dive onto. Actually, it's Dr. Kubacki now. He has a PhD in psychology that he got from the University of New Mexico. And I did a deep dive, and I found a very good series of articles written by a woman named Ellen Killeran back in 2019. Some really good information. Developed a chronology of basically Kubacki's claims and his academic efforts and all of that. And then I went to his actual website, and if you start to put all of these three things together, his story, his current story, a recent interview he did in 2023, just last year, and then the reporting, like you just referred to, the article you sent to us, and Ms. Killeran's stuff, it kind of starts to paint a picture, and you can draw some potential conclusions out of that, which, I'll go into a little bit later. Some things that seem disparate at first, but if you start putting the pieces together, it kind of paints a picture that may or may not be as mysterious as people think.
Ryan, what do you think, brother?
Yeah, this is, I have to agree that these things happen. And, when you deep dive into this stuff, you find other cases, much like we had described in Vegas with the underground tunnels. There was a guy in Vegas known as Kenny Veach, who was a hiker and kind of went out in the wilderness, similar to Kubacki. And this was more recent. And what was wild is he found something he called the M cave. It was shaped in the form of an M, and he went inside he got close to it, and he could hear voices inside of it in strange colors. And he was scared for his life and ran off. And he went back due to internet and trolling and YouTube. And he still has YouTube videos of this M cave and him hiking out to it. But he was urged to go back and go into the cave. It was in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and all kinds of people speculated all kinds of things. And he as well went missing and has not been found. And it was a similar case with the with like the ski pole. People found his cell phone, they found his car, but he was nowhere to be seen. But when you really start to pick some of these things apart, there are some interesting coincidences and possibilities that make you wonder if there might be a more rational explanation.
Well, what's weird about this is whenever he came back, we're talking about Steven Kubacki here. Whenever he came back, he had a backpack full of items that he claimed that he had no idea how he got. He supposedly had like maps of the western part of the United States with him that he didn't recognize or know how he got. And then the other question is if he was just going to like disappear and just, run off, he wasn't, happy with his life, like some people have kind of theorized that he was doing, then why did he just leave all of his stuff up on Lake Michigan? It didn't really make too much sense. Like you would think if you were just going to, I guess maybe to make it more believable that he like maybe was trying to might fake his death. I don't know, might fake his death or whatever. But it's just interesting that if that was the case and he just wanted to kind of run away and not have anybody know where he was and everyone think that he's dead, then why didn't he take any of his stuff with him?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, this was in 1978. Now, I started college in 1983, so not too far after this. And what we have to remember is you didn't have the internet, you didn't have phones, you didn't have, unless you work for the government or a large agency, access to computer time. DARPANET was about the only big network where all of these computers were linked. You didn't have, like I said, cell phones. You could still go up to the airport and walk right up to the gate and buy your tickets with cash using an assumed name. And if you remember back in the case when they found his two skis neatly placed side by side, the two poles neatly placed in the snow, which does not indicate somebody who fell in a crevasse, and the backpack placed very neatly on top of the skis. The only piece of ID that was found in the backpack was a bill from his dentist. So it sounds like maybe his driver's license and any other, stuff, he might have taken with him. So it's one of those things that back then, and I actually have a book in my library written during that time period on how to disappear, how to go and to a cemetery, find an infant that died, young, go to the court of records, get their birth certificate, then use that to establish an entirely new identity. So, it's one of those things that, trying to look at it through the 21st century optics of, how could somebody go missing? Back then it was pretty easy. You could just, tune out and never be heard from again.
Yeah, and then it's also interesting too that whenever he got back 15 months later, he then claimed that. Why would he claim that he didn't remember the 15 months prior?
That's where the story unravels. That's where the house of cards start gingerly coming apart. In his interview in 2023, if you go to his personal website, which is stevenkubacki.com, he talks about a book that he has co-written with Dylan Quarles. And he says he will not discuss what happened during those months, but he does give some interesting things that he said that they will find in the book. And like I said, this is straight from his website. A revolutionary organization. Now you have to remember, this was just a few years after Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army. He mentions a idealistic terrorist in training named Nathan T. Stanfield, spiritual experiences, hallucinogenic drugs. Oh, where else have we heard about hallucinogenic drugs that make people, forget their place in society? I think the thing called MK something. What was that? I don't know. I don't recall. Alternative realities. And last but not least, the French Foreign Legion. Now, he says these are things that will all bear during the narrative in his book that have to do with those missing 15 months. So, it's just kind of a big question mark on what exactly happened. And now that he has a degree of recollection years later, many, many years later, to the point where he can actually recall it and put it into a book. So, yeah, take that for what it's worth. I think it's very interesting that he now seems to have some kind of sharp recollection. And it's not what you would think. It's like this, hallucinogenic drugs in the French Foreign Legion and, revolutionary groups in the U.S. It's just all very odd.
That is really strange. Maybe he didn't actually remember when he got back, and then little things started kind of coming back to him, but he's not 100% sure on it, so he can't really say exactly what it was. Like kind of like little fragments of things that happened. But then it's like, well, how did he get to being alone out on Lake Michigan skiing to being drugged and put into some kind of program, some kind of MK Ultra program? That would be the strange thing. Would the CIA just be out there waiting for him to go on the skiing trip to like capture him or whatever? Did you notice anything about like weird weather anomalies in the search for him? Were there any strange? Because that seems like we've talked about it several times. I think me and Ryan and both me and Trey have talked about the weird weather anomalies that happen whenever these people go missing, and it normally like calls off the search. Was there anything like that in your research that you found on this guy?
No, not anything in particular. There were several helicopters, and the search apparently was a lot bigger than the media originally let on. It was a huge search. Now you got to remember this guy went to let me get my notes out here. Deerfield Academy. Deerfield Academy is an extremely exclusive prep school and boarding school in Deerfield, Massachusetts. I mean, like extremely exclusive. So, if you had this guy go missing, his family, even though this was in another state, could put a lot of influence, on doing a massive search. But I remember reading about the weather, and it seemed like the search was, reasonable. The weather wasn't awful. That there were actually a man and a woman sighted the day before taking photographs. That the man was having his photograph taken by a long, dark-haired woman adjacent to where he went missing. So I thought that was odd. And it was clear enough that the snowmobilers saw his skis and equipment out on the ice. So, but you have to also remember, this is right at the point of what they call the Michigan Triangle, which has, strange ships and all kinds of weird stuff that goes on in that part of the world.
Yeah, for people that are just joining in, we're talking about Steven Kubacki. He's a gentleman that went missing in 1978, skiing up in Lake Michigan. And when he didn't return, his dad filed a missing persons report. The police investigated the area. They found his snowmobile. He found his skis, his poles, and his backpack. And they did an extensive search, like Trey was just mentioning, for the student. The search and rescue team said that it's possible that he fell through the ice and that he had drowned underneath the ice on Lake Michigan. And then 15 months later, he is then picked up by a hitchhiker who asked him to be taken to the nearest payphone, and it was Steven Kubacki. And he told his friends, his family, and the media that he didn't remember the last 15 months. A lot of strange things were found in his backpack. He had clothes on that he didn't recall how he got his clothes. He had maps in his backpack. Was there anything else that was strange in his backpack that he had that he didn't remember having, Trey?
Yeah, he had $40. He had a new set of clothes that he was wearing that were not his. He had a T-shirt from a marathon run that was ran in Wisconsin. And the thing that I thought was the most intriguing is he had an entirely new set of spectacles. His glasses were different. So, I don't know if you could just walk into an optometrist, without any ID back then. You probably could, and just get a new set of spectacles. So he was, actually involved in things. There were certain things, if I recall right, certain pieces of pocket litter, receipts and junk in his backpack that made it look like he had jumped around different places. And I'm trying to see if I can find this in my notes. I think it was like Chicago and California. And, let's see. He had a backpack filled with maps, hitchhiking signs, meaning receipts and stuff, making it look like he traveled through Sacramento, San Francisco, Reno, Chicago, and Utah. He had $40 in cash, new glasses, new sneakers, and a T-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin.
But his car was found as well, right? Because he drove up to the Lake Michigan. His car was found. So maybe someone else picked him up or something. Ryan,
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you know of any other cases where people have? You just mentioned there's several cases that are sort of like this, but is there any other cases where people have gone missing and then reappeared after a long period of time? The only one I can really think of, which is missing 411 missing persons, which was I think it was in the second one, maybe either the first missing 411 documentary or the second one, where the kid went missing, and he like traveled all through like 15 miles and went through barbed wire fences and everything. And his dad eventually found him face down in the snow. But I don't think that was that long of amount of a time between those. I think it was maybe like a day or two. You know of any other instances of people going missing and then reappearing after a long amount of time?
Yeah, it is. It's not, unfamiliar territory to have these stories. And sort of like Trey has alluded, when you go prior to the internet period, to the cell phone period, there's a lot more of them. That story of Kenny Veach with the M Cave is kind of unique because it's cell phone era, it's internet era. But yeah, some of them are absolutely wild. There's the legend of the Zanetti train, which was a train on its maiden voyage carrying, I believe, 104 passengers, which never emerged out of a tunnel in Italy. And then the train was seen in Mexico in the 1840s. And a lot of paranormal investigators and researchers have spent years searching the evidence, but it's really, unique because there's a bit of substance there. But prior to cell phones, prior to internet, it's difficult. This particular train, it was the maiden voyage, so everybody was new, which there was a lot of chaos and confusion. Basically offering free rides for basically 100 passengers. And the train was going from Rome to Milan, and it was scheduled to pass through this brand new half-mile long tunnel in the Lombard Mountains. And it entered one side, people saw it, it just didn't come out the other side. And then being seen in Mexico in the 1840s and people talking about people speaking a strange language, wearing different clothing. The legend kind of grows. That's the problem, is it grows and it gets more elaborate. Every time somebody tells it over time, more details are added. And with this Steven Kubacki case, I find that when these things take place, not to say that there isn't anything anomalous that doesn't happen out there in the world, because I think we're all of the opinion that very much this is possible, that there are technologies, there are anomalous electromagnetic frequencies and terrestrial magnetics which can occur, and that portals are a thing. I mean, many cultures have talked about them for millennia, but you have to really kind of go through these cases carefully because it's easy to get sucked into them.
This one is just the strangest one that it's so hard to put your finger on it. Like a lot of the other cases that me and Trey and that I've looked up and looked into, I've been able to really find a solid explanation on. Like the Outlive Pass incident, you can put a solid explanation on that. You can put a solid explanation on the 1993 Corvinia incident. You can put a solid explanation on a lot of this stuff. You can even put a solid explanation on the Yuba County 5 that me and Trey did an episode on last time. This one, though, it's so weird.
Well, let me throw some stuff out there, if I may. I don't want to act like I'm monopolizing all of this. I just, I'm one of those researcher guys, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to burst, if I don't get this out. So, so let's go back and take a look at the environment, not only the physical environment, but the sociological environment that he lived in. He was a very wealthy, came from a wealthy family. He was going to a very small Christian liberal arts school there in Michigan. And they talked to his roommate, or not a roommate, but one of his classmates. And it was really interesting because they said that he was into Dungeons and Dragons. Now, there's nothing wrong about being into Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. I played Dungeons and Dragons in high school and a little bit later. But during his 2023 interview as a 68-year-old adult, he admitted that he was so much into what he called J.R.R. Tolkien, i.e. Dungeons and Dragons, that his group actually wore hoods and capes around, that they were, that kind of fringy, kind of avant-garde, Dungeons and Dragons fantasy group. And when they interviewed some of his classmates, it was said that he hung out with a weird group, and it was so strange that when they interviewed the dean of students during the investigation, he actually said that he hung around with about 20 quote unquote weird people. Okay, and his world was so strange and so opposite of what this conservative Christian college was, that he lived off campus. He was kind of, wasn't, lock, stock, in step with the, the Christian worldview of this very conservative college. As I said before, the day before his disappearance, and Miss Killeran did an excellent job of getting a copy of the police report for this disappearance. There was a young man who was climbing across the jagged ice, because in Lake Michigan, the ice will be pushed up against the shore and cause big jagged, ice cliffs and stuff like that. A young black-haired petite girl was taking picture of a young man climbing along these crags there on Lake Michigan. The next day, a young man's ski poles, backpack, and skis are found in that same general location. And this is where the whole thing starts to unravel a little bit. People at that time, some of them believe that he actually orchestrated the whole thing, and there wasn't much of an uproar on the campus when he disappeared. There wasn't a candlelight vigil. There wasn't a outpouring of support, for his family and everything at the university. And I remember, we had a guy get murdered when I was in university, and there was outpouring. So remember that. So we had the day before somebody taking photographs of a young man. Now, he was known to have several girlfriends, but they were in either Germany, because he did spend some time as a student studying in Germany, and France. So, I don't know if your bespectacled D&D hood-wearing guy was much of a ladies' guy in Europe. I just don't know. I know that's not the way it was when I was in university. But apparently he had interactions with females, perhaps maybe from that same environment, with that same worldview. There's an entry in the police report, about a female student whose name has been redacted, so it's not clear really who she was, that may have been at that lakeshore or with somebody else. This female stopped going to classes around the time that Kubacki vanished. Within 2 or 3 weeks, she had left the campus and had gone to live with an aunt in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She had been deeply distraught when he went missing. Extremely distraught. So distraught she left college and had threatened to take her own life because of this, leaving a suicide note for her roommate tied directly back to the Kubacki disappearance. So when I start putting all of this together, is you have a kind of outsider breaking traditional conventions at a very conservative Christian college. You have a female he goes missing. You have a female at about the same time that becomes extremely distraught at him going missing, threatens suicide, and mysteriously disappears to live with an aunt in Grand Rapids, Michigan during the 70s. And the guy disappears and comes back 15 months later. 15 months is a few months past 9 months. So do you see where I'm heading? It's possible that he may have impregnated this female. She was at a conservative Christian college. She left, went back to live with her aunt to have the baby or abort it. And he was so embarrassed because of his strict, affluent family back in Massachusetts that he took off and disappeared for 15 months, well after a possible baby would have been born.
That is putting the detective and the investigative hat on, Trey. Damn. That's like,
well, I don't get to do it anymore. I don't get to do it anymore professionally. So whenever something rolls across my desk and I get a chance to stretch the old investigative muscles, I really, unfortunately, dig into it.
That's great. I mean, that sounds highly plausible. But then But then too, why after all these years, like if that was really the case, I mean, how many years ago was that? That would have been what, 80, 90, 2000, like 40, over 40 years ago. Like, why not come out and be like, hey, this is what happened? I mean, obviously,
Well,
no one would care at this point if that's
no,
what
I've got a theory for that too. Is if you go back and you look at his chronological list of education, okay, he jumped around in universities. He got his degree in German from Hope College. He got his MA in linguistics from Ohio University in Massachusetts. He taught German to or English to the Saudi Arabian National Guard back in the early 80s. He got his clinical psychology PhD at the University of New Mexico in 1990. So he was doing pretty well. He was, pretty respected. He actually, 1990 to 92, he had a 2-year internship in clinical psychology at Dartmouth Medical School. He did his PhD dissertation, and it was, quote, called Comparing Values and Methods of Cognitive Behavioral and Psychodynamic Therapies. So the man clearly was an academician. In 92 to 98, he was a professor in Laramie, Wyoming. And this is where things take an interesting turn. Is next, from 1998 to 2001, he was the director of clinical training at the Odysee School of Professional Psychology. This is a for-profit university that was not accredited by the APA and was quite shady. As a matter of fact, they had to be closed down because of improper dealing with finances. So then he moves to a place called Bastyr University and was the chair of the Department of Psychology. Now, this is a very new age university and is not very well respected in the community. So then 2005 to the present, he goes into private practice for adults and children and is also a writer. So here the man is he's 68 years old. He's doing his private practice. I don't know how much of a nest egg he has built up. And then all of a sudden, at about retirement age, I'm going to put out a book. I'm going to get a co-author and I'm going to write this book and I'm going to make it all mysterious and tell people I'm not going to talk about what happened during those 15 months. But if you buy my book, it's in there. Is he getting ready for retirement? And is this a way of possibly padding his meager income as a retiree?
What do you think, Ryan? You think this was a plot to get rid of his, to kind of disappear in this pregnancy that would have been frowned upon at the time? Because I would imagine it would have been really frowned upon especially like in that day and age, if you got in being at a college, a Christian college, and impregnating someone without being married and all the Christian values. Or was this a time travel thing, Ryan? Was it a alien abduction, like a lot of people say that are talking about in the chat right now? Or was it a CIA MK Ultra program?
I think supported by the evidence, and I understand that he's much like Trey says, he's trying to kind of put it out there. He has this way of putting it out there, hypothetically alluding to the fact that there might be some time travel involved or some missing time. And I get that. That's not to say that this is an impossibility, but the fact is, to me, it really has like this air of like Forrest Gump with missing time. He's moving around. He's going different places. There's evidence of that. He's on this adventure, but then he doesn't remember, or he alleges not to remember the adventure. And it's very different than other cases where it's like, I went into the future or I went into the past and this is what I saw. So some aspects are very different. So it's difficult to chalk this up to time dilation, And of course, Einstein's theory of special relativity states that, time is relative, specifically to an observer, but he doesn't even take the position of being an observer. So it's, I don't know. This is one that it really reminds me of like a dude, Where's My Car meets Forrest Gump. He doesn't know what happened, but it happened to him. And so I haven't read the book. Has anybody gotten anything out of that?
Yeah, it's not published yet. He's apparently, based on his webpage as of today, he's still shopping for a publisher. And it's really funny because you go to his website and he already has a list for podcasters, like things that you can talk about during podcast interviews, and he's casting that net out there. So it's just it's very odd. And like I said, mine is just a theory. That's just based on the data. That's a hypothesis. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it could be an explanation.
I think it's a very good hypothesis that took a lot of detailed research and discovery on. This is his website, Steven Kubacki, PhD. Well, StevenKubacki.com, and yeah, I guess he's, and it does make sense that because that's something that you would do at the end of your, the end of retirement when you're just kind of wanting to screw off and not really do anything. I'll just write this book and make it all mysterious. I mean, what does he have to lose at that point? I mean, he's what, 60 some years old? How old is he, Trey? 68?
He's 68. Now, the opposite side of that coin is perhaps something very strange did happen to him that could be perceived by his colleagues, peers, and the public as indicative of mental illness. So it would not bode well for him as a practicing clinical psychologist to write, print, and publish a tome, basically throwing signs of mental illness out there. That would not be a career enhancer, I would imagine. I know that, probably wouldn't go over too well in, my former career. So, maybe all of this strange stuff did happen. And the reason he's not publishing previously is he wanted to wait until the end of his career so there would be no professional repercussions. I mean, that's another possibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, then if this girl really was kind of involved as well, then she could have traveled up there with him to Lake Michigan, and then he left his car behind and then hopped in her car.
Yeah.
And dipped out. But then, so, why make all this stuff about the LSD and the MK Ultra and like time travel?
Yeah, the weird thing is he didn't talk about it for years and years and years and years and years. And now, and I suggest you go listen to the interview. It's really interesting. It's on another podcast, and I'm not going to mention the podcast unless you are okay with it. But it's it's really interesting that he talks about this stuff, and now some of it is starting to come out. But you have to go to his webpage to kind of dig this data out. One of the things that he told the podcaster is, I will not talk about what happened during those 15 months on this podcast. I will not talk about it. And his co-guest was Mr. Quarles. So they both.
Why are they even bringing him on if he doesn't want to talk about supposedly what he experienced in those 15 months? That doesn't make any sense.
That's really strange because he talked about what happened, his life up before, his life afterwards, and there was a whole lot of it's in the book, comments.
Miguel Highward, thank you. I posted a $5 super chat. Thank you very much for your contributions to the show, my friend. I posted on a live stream with 26K people and told them Ryan called certain stuff to happen. This is the only way I can comment. Get him, Ryder. Thank you so much for your contributions to the show. Really appreciate it. Yes. I mean, it all kind of adds up in a way when you think of it like critically and logically, but then too, would he just be hopping around with this pregnant girl like all over the West Coast during that time? And why did he have all this stuff in in his backpack when he showed back up 15
Yeah.
minutes later.
Yeah. I really, like I said, this is just a hypothesis. This is just one of many explanations that are out there. But, for me, it kind of made sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes a lot more sense than time travel or abduction or alien abduction or any of that stuff. Have you ever heard of like people having like dreams of their missing relatives, and then they have a dream of where they are, and then like the police couldn't find them or the investigation team couldn't find them, and then they have a dream about it where they are, like their location, and then they go find them?
Ryan, does any of that ring a bell for you?
Yeah, that goes into like this. It's really a new technology. If you guys follow the Phase, which Trey may be aware of this, it's an app that a lot of intelligence professionals are getting these days by a gentleman who was born in a Siberian scientific laboratory, and he's perfected all kinds of these focused phase states in like REM sleep. And yeah, you can access planes of existence that can allow more information in than is usually possible. And I mean, this stuff, not to get too woo-woo, but with this particular case, until somebody reads the book, we really don't know, right? But I think Trey might be really grasping onto like the higher ground here, the more stable ground, and the parts that we can nail down, which is definitely the truth. Just to be devil's advocate, I think, what does this mean in for a whole of like paranormality and time travel? Well, I think that we know, at least scientists believe, I should say, that according to time travel theory, the faster you travel, the slower you experience time. So experiments have shown this to be true. So unless it's a scenario where he was just in such a slow state of experiencing whatever he experienced that he doesn't remember much, I think, like he said, that it was like going into the Twilight Zone. I don't want to call the guy a liar, but on the other hand, he's really not giving us a whole lot of tangible observational data to make any kind of reasonable explanation or come to any reasonable explanation, because there's just nothing there. It's like, you can ask me these questions, you can't ask me these questions, you've got to read the book, and that makes it difficult until somebody reads the book.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if anybody has done a remote viewing session on this. I'll kind of cast some questions out there, see if I can find out if anybody's done that. I think it's ripe for remote viewing, so that would be really cool to see what comes out of that.
Well, it's also interesting too is if he did kind of fake it and then go off on this adventure with his girlfriend, and then somehow like break it off with her, and then until the baby's born, and then went on an adventure for 4 months afterwards, or what would that be, 6 months? Yeah, baby's born in 9 months, 6 months afterwards, he just goes off on an adventure on the West Coast, and then runs out of money and runs out of whatever other resources he has, and then is hitchhiking, and then this guy picks him up and is like, "Hey, take me to a payphone. I got to make a call to my dad so I can get out of this mess that I've created." Why wouldn't he just get rid of the stuff in his backpack, right? Then you wouldn't have to create an explanation. Then you wouldn't have to say, "Oh, I don't know about it. I don't know how I got these clothes on, or where these receipts came from, or where these maps came from." Just ditch it all. Just get rid of it all. Then you don't have to come up with an explanation.
Yeah. You and I had talked about, when we were private messaging back and forth, about the fugue state. That when people get into a situation that they can't think their way out of, they can't come up with a plausible plan, is sometimes they fall into what's called a fugue state, and they just run. There's no rhyme or reason to it. They just get as far away from the situation as he could. And, hypothetically, I have to keep throwing that word out there. This is just a theory. If a girl had came to him and said, "Hey, I'm pregnant, I'm having a baby in 7 months," he said, "I don't want any part of it. I don't want any part of, with you. I'm done." And then he said, "Okay, maybe I can throw my backpack and skis out on the ice and just run away as far as I can using the thumb." And back in the 70s, hitchhiking was still a very viable means for a person of either little means or wanting to clandestinely travel across the country to use. Hitchhiking was still relative. I'm not going to say safe, but it was an acceptable means to get from point A to point B.
Man, can't do that anymore after 9/11, dude. No one picks up any hitchhiker anymore, ever.
Except
and also, I think the serial killers put a little dampening on that before 9/11 too.
Except I remember Ryan telling a story about a strange hitchhiker clad in fur as he and his mother were driving along one time. But that's a whole other story.
Oh yeah, tell us about it, Ryan. I want to know about this hitchhiker.
This is wild. Yeah, this happened actually quite recently. We were coming back from the Moon Lake gathering up that was held in Altamont, Utah. And it's very strange because I had seen this same entity or person or whatever we want to call it with another individual, Alan Jin, who Trey knows. And he basically picked me up for breakfast. We were going to have some breakfast, and we got to an area known as Three Corners. And for lack of a better word, we see a completely nude, younger Native American girl, I would say 20s, jump over a fence line, run across the street in front of us, wave and smile, and jump over the next fence line and run into the field. No shoes, no clothes, only had a satchel of fur and tanned hide on. And, I just kind of looked at Alan and said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw it." So we went and had breakfast. Anyway, and I've told many people about that story, but fast forward to what happened more recently. I was with my mother, of all people, coming back from the Moon Lake Gathering conference where I'd just spoken. And instead of going the usual way back to Space Wolf research, we went back a slightly different way. And I had mentioned to her about this same sighting. And I just kind of, it was in the back of our minds. I wasn't expecting to see anything. And just north of Three Corners, boom, we see this black, like a bulky black package, it looks like, in the road. At first, I didn't know if it was like someone's laundry or like a dog that had been hit by a semi. It was just a black bulk of matter. And as we approached it in the vehicle, it stood up, very wildly stood up, kind of like shaking things off. It had a leather strap in one hand, partially clothed, again, no shoes. And as we got closer, I got the same smile and wave, and it was the same girl. And she had red face paint on her face this time. And I went by so slow that, we got a really good look. And I looked at my mom and I'm like, "That's the girl that I told you about before." And she's like, "You're kidding me." And of course, my mom said, "Why did you wave?" And I said, "I don't know. I did the first time too. I'm such a sucker." And, my mom tried to urge me to turn around and go back, and I wasn't having it. I've talked to too many elders that, tell you not to make eye contact, not to wave, not to do these things. So I didn't turn back. But if I encounter that again with someone else, I'm not sure what I'll do. I'm not sure what I'll do, but I probably won't wave.
That is wild, dude. That is super wild. I heard a very interesting theory of the other day watching some YouTube shows where they're talking about how maybe the skinwalker or dogman or whatever this entity is, like, has the ability to, like, possess animals. Have you ever heard of that before? Where like they can, like they'll take a young cat or like kittens or like something and then like put their essence into that animal and then it like mutates I don't know. I don't really know. I didn't really think about it too much, but I just thought that it was really interesting. And I listened to this case where this guy had many encounters in his neighborhood with this dog man type creature, and he noticed that the trash can, like the dumpster right by his house, like always had kittens in it, like all the time. It was like this place where people from all over the county and the thing would come to just drop off like kittens in this dumpster. And he would go out there, he would hear the kittens, and then the next day the kittens would be gone. And he had many like interactions with these dogmen type creatures, and he like came to the conclusion that these creatures were taking these animals, like these super young animals. I don't know. I thought it was really interesting.
Well, it's very fairly, I should say, not very well known, but fairly well known in certain circles that animals have a tendency to react sort of like biosensors when these things are around, and that can transform their behavior significantly and get them to do things that are very much not normal. Like maybe those kittens were, I don't know, in that trash container for safety or a variety of other reasons. But oddly, according to my Hopi elder friends, they said that the demoness who empowers skinwalkers manifests as a female with red face paint. And this was something new to me, and I thought I knew everything when it came to shapeshifters. And this is concerning because if I see her in this dimension, according to them, it's because she's targeting my consciousness, which the red face paint has something to do with that targeting. And of course, I took this. I was like, oh, this is great. And they were like, no, this is not great. This is not great. So I don't know. I don't know exactly, what's up with the smile and the wave, especially because it doesn't seem like an accidental encounter. Now that it's two people deep, people who, weren't expecting to see it. And I'm not sure what might be happening, but it's in close proximity to the property that you were discussing at Space Wolf Research. And I guess we're going to find out more, but animals definitely react to these things. And that's why if you have animals around and they start acting strangely, and you have some other accidental encounter that might be paranormal in nature, there's a very good reality that these things could be coinciding for some reason.
Well, it looks like we lost Trey. He's probably going to come back in. Oh, no, he's gone. He'll come back in. What this reminded me of, the story with the animals, it almost seemed like a sacrifice. Have you seen Game of Thrones? You watch Game of Thrones? Well, there's, I think in like the third or fourth season when they're out beyond the wall, and I want to call him Crowley, but I think I'm just thinking Aleister Crowley, but the little village of the man that has just nothing but daughters, and every time there's no boys, there's like no men there, he just has nothing but daughters, and it turns out that he's taking the sons that he has with all these women, and he's sacrificing them to the Night King so that he can like create his army of undead. That's what this kind of reminded me of, like that the cats were, if the story is true, I'm not saying that I believe the story, I just think it's an interesting story and it's fun to speculate and theorize on. If that was actually happening, it seems like some kind of like weird sacrifice or like an animal sacrifice. Like, why are all these people just bringing large amounts of kittens to this dumpster all the time, and only this dumpster? You know?
it's freaky, and animal sacrifice has so much to do with so many different traditions, even all of the cults, really, whether you look at any of them, even the more popular modern day religions have long and extensive histories of different forms of animal sacrifices and burnt offerings. So they command the attention of some of these entities behind the veil. That's for sure.
Yeah, some countries even still do like animal sacrifice out in the open. There's Treys back. Some countries even do it like they'll like sacrifice like goats and sheep just like out in the middle of the street, like for their religion. I think there's like a day out of every year that they're just allowed to sacrifice animals in the street.
Yeah, I have kind of a funny story about that. It was a bit of a culture shock. Is I was attending a course at I'm trying to remember. I believe it was at the U.S. Army Intelligence Center and School, and I was staying in the officers' dormitory, and they host a lot of foreign officers. And I remember I walked into the into the area where they have the communal washing machines and all, and in the big sink, big washroom sink, there was a gutted chicken. So somebody had either sacrificed a chicken, from another culture, or they had went and somehow found a live chicken and gutted it and left the detritus of that grisly act there in the big wash basin.
Yeah, animal sacrifice, freaking human sacrifice to the gods. Like our history is so
at the U.S. Army Intelligence Center and School.
What about they were doing it there?
Yes, that's where the dormitory was.
Wild. Okay, if you're from another country, and you don't have citizenship, you can't join the military, right?
Yeah, what they'll do is they do a lot of exchange programs. And I remember when I was going through the intel school, we had actually British officers. I think we had one officer that might have been Colombian. You actually do have officers that will be granted temporary clearances up to a certain point, usually not at the top secret / special compartmented information level, but they'll be granted clearances like up to secret, and they can attend schools to a point with the U.S. military. It's there's tons of exchange officers all over the world, both U.S. and foreign.
Sounds like a covert spy program, Trey.
Well, it's I'd rather not go too deep into that, but yeah, it's an old business. It's been around a while.
Yeah, it makes sense. We'll send our exchange military people over to your country, and we'll get a little information out of you, and you can send your exchange people over into our country, and that's how it'll work. We'll play nice with each other. That's what it seems like to me. I don't know. All right, gentlemen, you guys got anything else that you would like to bring up? Any strange things that you're itching to get off your chest, or strange disappearances, or strange acts, or anything of high strangeness? Anything been happening at Uintah Basin of late, Ryan?
That would have to be the main wild observation, was that sighting. But I do want to get Trey's opinion with his background of it's sort of along the lines of devices and maybe even time travel a little bit. There is the gentleman Andrew Basiago that has claimed that he was part of something called Project Pegasus, that he said was a very large umbrella under DARPA of time travel. Most likely Nikola Tesla technology, according to a lot of the people that have researched it. These two big parenthesis booms with like a really rough power cord you could just plug in, and anyway, controllable. seems really far-fetched. He's been kind of poo-pooed out of a lot of real research. But interestingly, I mean, the guy's a real guy, and he's got real stories of when he claims to have gone places, unlike Kubacki. But I want to get Trey's opinion of a more recent potential connection to a newer Project Pegasus, which might be under the same umbrella. I'm unsure. But all of these devices in the Middle East that have been exploding, and what his thoughts are, if that might be coming out of the same NSO group or Mossad, or if this is just a coincidence. What do you think, Trey?
Yeah. Now, let me preface this. I am out of the business, so everything I say is merely speculation, not based on any kind of knowledge that I had previously or have now. So got to cover everybody's rear end on that. Is going back to some of the more esoteric DARPA stuff, and Walter Bosley will probably feel the same way I do. When you're read into a special program, you sign an indoctrination statement, which is basically you will not ever talk about this kind of statement. And if you think that statement will not be executed, Julian Assange, who isn't even a U.S. citizen, released that information, classified information, which wasn't even that highly classified on WikiLeaks. And the U.S. government has been dogging him to the point where he had to take refuge in the Nicaraguan embassy. So that's to the extent that the U.S. will go if somebody compromises information. So, if anybody says, hey, I'm going to tell you about this secret program, there's two things. Either the program's already been declassified, they're really risking being stuck in a federal prison for the rest of their life, or they're full of what my kids used to call caca. One of those three. So that's the front end of the question. The back end of the question, talking about the Israeli assassination, is placing small micro packages of explosives in communications devices is not that uncommon for Mossad. If you study the 1972 Munich operation, where the Black September group, assassinated Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics, when Mossad sent their teams out to assassinate them, one of the methods they used was breaking into a guy's home, putting an explosive charge inside the receiver of his telephone that was keyed to a certain tone. And so basically they called the guy at home. He answered and they said, is this, blah, blah, blah. And he says, yes. And they sent that tone and basically blew half his head off. So they're used to operations like this. The Israeli or the Hezbollah pager and walkie-talkie incident, what I'm hearing through open sources is that the pagers were actually manufactured in Taiwan, in I think Germany, under a license by the Taiwanese company that has the pagers. So you're one step away from the original manufacturers. And my belief is either that was a Mossad front company, or Mossad somehow got into there, or they co-opted this shipment from Germany to Hezbollah. And the reason Hezbollah went to that is because Israel was targeting their cell phones and sending missiles right on top of their cell phones. And so they were able to get into that, the operating system of that pager, program it to explode, send a circuit, activate a circuit at a certain tone, and set off the explosive. So what they've done was a master operation in disrupting Hezbollah command, control, and communications, what we call C3. Is, a lot of these guys have the pagers in their front pockets. When you get your penis and testicles blown off, that sends a message. And so now they're not trusting any of their communications devices, and they completely cut the head off the serpent by not allowing the brain to communicate with the rest of the body. So I think it wasn't anything, overly esoteric. I think it was just excellent intelligence work, excellent field work, and just some of the extremely spooky stuff that Mossad does that only Mossad does so well.
Great answer.
Yeah, I'm right there with Trey. With Project Pegasus, sounds like a completely made up program, and a lot of these things are completely made up. Literally, the only ones that we know about are the declassified ones or the unclassified programs. It's the only ones that we can possibly know about. If someone throws out a real program that is still classified, they would be gone after. No, hands down.
Yeah, and what happens in that, and I'm not confirming or denying I've never been involved in something like this, but if a program or information about something is accidentally discovered or figured out, or somebody has an epiphany, and that word gets back to counterintelligence agencies, throughout the various services, is that individual will be pulled into a room, and they'll be seated in front of specialists and agents, and a paper will be slid across to them called an inadvertent disclosure statement, and it'll say, "Hey, Bob, you're a really smart guy, and you figured something out, and somebody heard you talking about what you figured out in the cafeteria. Well, oopsie, that information that you were talking about in the cafeteria is classified at blah, blah, blah level. Here is an agreement for you to sign. You're saying, I accidentally found this information. It was no fault of my own. I will never discuss it again until I receive authorization from the proper original classification authority that has been downgraded to unclassified. You sign your name, the agent signs the name as taking the oath. Everybody goes home happy. Unless you talk about it, because you basically have been told legally that that is classified information, and under U.S. law, you cannot disclose that information. And if you willfully disclose it, you'll be getting a visit. And it's not, you're not going to be, have a 9mm Glock suppressor stuck up under your chin or anything dramatic like that. You'll just be arrested, taken to federal court, convicted, and put in, prison. An example of that is Robert Hansen, FBI agent that ran the counterintelligence operations against the KGB back in the 70s and 80s, turned out to be a KGB double agent. He recently died, but his life after he was arrested was in a cell at the Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado. 23 hours a day he was in a cell. He saw sunlight for 1 hour, and that was for the rest of his natural life. So, people that go out and, come up with these outlandish claims, and I need to reach out to Walter because I've got some questions about some claims that have come out here lately about the individual that has done that. Are you willing to roll those dice? For me, I'm chicken. I'm not going to roll them. I like my life pretty much the way it is now. So, you have to take some of that stuff, like you said, with a grain of salt, certainly.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it. Trey, can you let people know where to find you online and plug your book? I know you're writing another book currently. Yeah. You got a lot of projects going on. Let people know what's going on with you.
Yeah, you can go to TreyHudsonResearch.com. Some of my stuff is there. That has the email address, which is TreyHudsonResearch@gmail.com. And also it has a link to my last book, which is the Meadow Project, Explorations into the South Skinwalker Ranch. And if you go on Facebook, Trey Hudson-author.
Links to Trey's information is in the description of this video. Ryan, let the people know where they can find you and what you got going on, brother.
Of course. Thanks for having me on today. It's been a pleasure. Hero Paranormal. You can go to YouTube, Patreon, or just heroparanormal.com.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thanks everyone in the chat. Really appreciate each and every single one of you for contributing to the conversation here today. And please be sure to hit that thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications, and we'll see you guys next time. Also, let us know what you guys think about this Steven Kubacki incident. Do you think it was time travel? Do you think it was aliens? Or do you think more along the lines of what Trey has discovered, which I think is a incredible research? Let us know what you think down in the comments below. See you guys next time.